I'm just going to give a brief overview. So multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease where your body's own immune system is attacking the myelin sheaths in your neurons, primarily in your brain and your spinal cord. And the degradation of these neurons leads to disruptions in the flow of information within your brain and also between your brain and your body. And this degradation also leads to lesions or scars in your white matter. So here's just a picture of comparing a healthy brain to a brain with MS. And you can definitely see the degradation of your white matter. And unfortunately, about 400,000 people in the United States suffer from MS. But luckily, there are drugs like Tecfidera that are kind of bringing hope to these patients and their families. So Tecfidera, formerly known as VD12, is an immunomodulator that reduces inflammation in the central nervous system. Once administered, the active substance of Tecfidera, which is dimethylfumarate, DMF, quickly metabolizes into methylfumarate, or MMF. And MMF's primary target is the KEP1 and NERV2 pathways. And you could just see this figure here. The NERV2 pathway is highly important because it promotes genes that encode for antioxidants and anti-inflammatory responses, which is very important because it reduces the demyelination. And it also has secondary targets, which Jackie will go into, but it's just that it prevents the infiltration. It prevents the infiltration of the immune cells to go into the brain. So it obviously doesn't allow for demyelination. And it also, in terms of when it's in your system, Tecfidera, about 240 milligrams, lasts about 2 to 2.5 hours. And the maximum concentration is about 1.8. And what I found interesting is that people that have high calorie and high fat diets, the Cmax reduces 40%. And
does that mean you have to take more drug?
I don't think so, no. But I mean, obviously, if they know that, they obviously are going to promote for you not to have high fat or high calorie diets. And although Tecfidera has a very low affinity and it can lead to different other complications such as progressive multifocal encephalopathy, or PML, that Charles will look at later. It was the first antioxidant drugs to show treatment in MS in phase 3 trials. And we're just going to look at these two different graphs to look at the efficacy. These two graphs represent a 2-year study, and the first figure 4 just represents the annualized relapse rate, or the ARR. And they're comparing the placebo, the BID, and the TID group. BID just basically means that they're taking Tecfidera twice a day, and TID is 3 times daily. And they saw that the people who are taking it twice a day, there was a reduction in the ARR, 56%. And even 60% for the people that are taking it 3 times a day.
So that means they have 60% less visits to the hospital, or relapses. Okay.
Yes. And then they also looked at the possibility of having relapses, and also at the 96 weeks or the 2 years, and they saw that people who were taking the placebo had about a 42% chance of having relapses, compared to people that were taking it 3 times a day that didn't have a 21% chance.
That's a big difference.
And so the approval of Tecfidera not only changed the market, but it also has changed the lives of 400,000 different people suffering from MS.
So does anyone remember the side effects of Tecfidera? I've kind of been the side effect guy for this whole time, so it's really been uplifting. It's been a very positive experience for me. So
Maria gets to tell us how we save patients and make their lives better, and then you get to tell us how you make them sick.
how everything just kind of sucks for a little bit. So the main one and the most important one that Tecfidera affects is a decline in concentration of blood cells.
Mm-hmm.
but there's also gastrointestinal influences, liver dysfunction, kidney dysfunction, and studies shown that in reproductive systems, sterility decreases, but it's kind of different between species, and it's not directly related to humans. So keeping this in mind, Tecfidera in itself is a rather safe drug. But that being said, so like we kind of went in depth last discussion. So today I figured I'd kind of go over what PML was, what the JC virus is, and then how this kind of, once the drug was released, like what kind of happened. So a year after the drug was released, they found that a death occurred from PML, so progressive multifocal encephalopathy. So progressive means it gets worse over time. Multifocal means it's not localized to a particular brain area. And then I think it's leukoencephalopathy. So leuko means white brain cell matter, so we're talking about the myelination. And then encephalopathy refers to the brain. So the JC virus is called the John Cunningham virus. And surprisingly enough, about 70 to 90% of the entire general population has contracted the JC virus, which is really surprising when you think about it, because since it's such an indicator, PML is a very rare virus, but the fact that everyone can potentially get this virus is kind of, it's very surprising, and it's definitely a risk factor to contracting PML. So the way this virus works is that this is the genetic structure. So if you look at the virus, it's plasmid, so it injects itself. So a lot of the human genome is in itself a part of viral or ancient viral structures. So this never necessarily leaves the human body. So like a virus, once you contract it, it's always there, it's always present. So that being said, it begins in the tonsils and it goes into the gastrointestinal tract, which is kind of not surprising because if you look at the side effects of Tecfidera, they're kind of similar. And then it eventually goes into the kidneys. And so if you look at the urine of individuals who have the JC virus, you can find, I believe it's called viral shedding. And the viral shedding is like small particles, and that's why it's so easily contractable, because in urban populations, water contamination can be a very common occurrence. So the problem becomes that it's not necessarily the JC virus, but in immunosuppressant drugs, that is what causes the effects of the JC virus to become prominent. And so when the immunosuppressant is occurring, the virus has the ability to cross the blood-brain barrier, which causes the demyelination of oligodendrocytes, which are the glial cells that repair the myelination of the neurons, as well as astrocytes, which their specific function isn't completely understood yet.
So in normal, healthy people that have good immune systems,
Yes.
they get infected with this virus and they live with this virus their whole life.
Yes.
And it doesn't really make them sick because their immune system just keeps it at bay and it never gets a chance to get into their central nervous system and do anything.
Right.
But if you had something like AIDS,
HIV patients, they have a high prominence of contracting PML. So like it's all dependent on the immune system. And since this is, even though Tecfidera isn't an immunosuppressive drug, it does have that side effect of decreasing the immune system, because it promotes oxidative stress relief, but it's not repressing the immune system. So in PML, it's the hard part about patients with MS who have PML is the fact that it's hard to diagnose because the symptoms aren't necessarily localized, because in MS lesions occur everywhere. So the symptoms can be widely varied. So like the most common symptoms are speech impediments as well as visual loss, and because it affects mostly the occipital lobe as well as the parietal lobe, which affects language. So these issues, although they're not localized, it's hard to kind of diagnose because the symptoms are so wide varied. And at the same time too, the only way to have a definitive understanding if the disease is existing is to go through a spinal tap, which is a painful and arduous process, which is